The media, the Democrats, and the so-called experts are now finally admitting what I first said 13 months ago. The evidence demonstrates that the virus originated in a Chinese government lab. Couldn't say it.
Donald Trump there making a somewhat rare post-presidency appearance. It was a few days ago. He was at North Carolina's Republican Party convention. There was widespread condemnation when Trump first floated the lab leak theory last year, but that theory is no longer dismissed as just some conspiracy theory. Calls are growing to investigate whether the COVID-19 virus originated in a lab in Wuhan, China, where the outbreak began. Katherine Eban is an investigative journalist and author, and she conducted a months-long investigation into that lab leak theory on behalf of Vanity Fair. Katherine, I got about 1 million questions for you. Let's see how many we can get through together. Let's start with gain-of-function research. That was what was being done at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and it was actually, in some parts, being funded by the U.S. government. Can you explain to us what it is and what the American connection is?
Sure. So gain-of-function research, which is controversial in the virology world, is basically the manipulation of pathogens to see if they could become more infectious. Some people view it as exceedingly high risk. You're manipulating something that doesn't exist in the natural world necessarily, with the possibility of unleashing it accidentally. And other people view it as very necessary as a way to gauge where the next set of risks would be. So the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was 7 miles away from the seafood market where the COVID-19 outbreak began, was engaged in this research with coronaviruses. And it was funded in part through grant money from the National Institute of Health and an entity called USAID, which is a sort of overseas development set of monies that the US government has. So, this has sort of complicated the picture of the origin of COVID-19 with people asking, is it possible that somehow accidentally COVID-19 emerged from this laboratory, not necessarily as a bioweapon, but as a laboratory accident?
And I think back to sort of those early days and President Trump, who himself was talking about this was perhaps a lab leak. It came out of the lab. And as a result, some people totally latched onto that theory. Other people said, well, if the president is saying it, then it can't possibly be true. What did you learn about the impact about Trump's words?
So those premature statements were really unfortunate because they dramatically politicized the question of the origin. And, within the US government, it created, as one source told me, a kind of antibody response where, government agencies were very concerned, rightly, about making false claims that were not supported by fact. So there became a sort of allergic reaction to asking what are, in retrospect, some important questions about the origin of COVID-19.
There was also questions early on within the U.S. State Department about the possibility of a lab leak and particularly about what could be said. What did you uncover about that?
Well, there were meetings in which a number of State Department officials say, and we collected contemporaneous documentation to this effect, they were basically told they should not be sort of digging into these questions of the Wuhan Institute of Virology's gain-of-function research because it could end up pointing towards U.S. involvement in it. So they viewed these admonitions as a kind of a cover-up. On the other hand, the people who are making those statements say what they were trying to say something completely different. They say that they were simply warning that you could not necessarily claim something untoward from the fact that there was risky research going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. What I was able to uncover is documentation about this debate within the State Department.
We, to this day, don't have evidence which proves one way or another that this was or was not a lab leak. And yet I look at the database that is also discussed in the article, in the work that you uncovered. It was taken, this was the database at the Wuhan lab, it was taken offline. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so this is their database where they log all of the bat coronavirus samples that they had collected in nature and all the strains that they were working with. The lead researcher there had made a claim that the database was taken down sort of in the middle of the pandemic because of attempted hacking. But in fact, independent researchers in this group that I write about called Drastic were able to identify that the database was taken down actually 3 months before the start of the pandemic. So, you know, that combined with questions about whether there was some concealment of certain viral strains that they'd uncovered in a mine shaft in Yunnan province raises questions about certainly a lack of transparency at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You talk about a lack of transparency. We certainly saw during the WHO, the very initial investigation that went over, that the Chinese were not at first receptive of it and controlled, perhaps limited what those investigators could see. We see President Biden has now called on his intelligence agencies to come up with an answer about COVID's origins, looking at the lab leak theory. Do you think we'll actually ever get an answer?
You know, it's really hard to say. You know, President Biden has directed his intelligence agencies to sort of go back to the drawing board, see what else is in their files about this. Within the US government right now, both hypotheses, that of a natural origin or that of a potential laboratory origin, are both still on the table. You know, but the other issue is that as time passes, as one scientist, David Relman, told me, biological signals degrade and it becomes more difficult to sort of unearth clues about the origin.
Katherine Eban, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.